What's going on, Paw fans? Welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Joe Berry and his possibilities for a round one selection. From all the talk that's coming out of Alberton across the first few weeks of pre-season, it looks to me like Joe Berry is a front runner to be a lock for round one against Collingwood. Now, a lot of factors have to go his way firstly before we even consider a round one side, but he's firming very likely. And talking to a couple of sources and looking at a couple of trainings myself, I've come to the conclusion that Joe Berry is definitely one to watch. So let's get into it and talk about Joe Berry's possibilities of playing round one. Pick 15 in the 2024 draft, Joe Berry has been cited by many as a bolter in that draft. He's been one that has been eyed off by a couple of clubs, including both from WA with Freo and West Coast. Both were looking at him as a possibility. I know Freo's interests were very keen, and that's why Port Adelaide traded up with the Eagles on the night to select him. He's obviously a Victorian kid. We know a lot about Joe's background and how impressive he's been, and one that we just know it has good eyes for draftees is Robbie Gray, and he was adamant on getting Joe Berry selected, and is one that's definitely been recruited by Robbie, so I trust him massively. Now, the big question is, and it's been one that's been talked about for a few days now, and I really wanted to get everyone's thoughts here. Will Joe Berry play round one? I have a feeling that a lot of people doing their selected sides for round one at the moment would have him on the cusp or on the bench at the very least, or starting sub. Now, in my personal opinion, I've always been pretty tentative with draft picks and picking them and their selection processes, and I'd have to wait and see and make a final call on that. But right now, I think Joe Berry's a lock for round one. He has been impressive. His ability to hit targets inside 50 has been one thing, but the other thing that's been really impressive is his goal sneaking ability. And I know from people at training, they've been talking how immaculate he is in front of goal. And we talk about the match simulation that happened just last week. We didn't see him in open training because they were part of a drafting coup for a drafting day in Melbourne. But when they came back and a couple of the draftees played on Friday in match simulation, Joe Berry was in the A side. And it's been talked about highly. I know when we were at open training as well, Chad Corns pretty much suggested that Joe Berry would have to do a lot wrong to get selected out of a round one side. So we talk about how impressed he's been by people within the club around the outside. I know a lot of fans are loving his abilities. The club itself are promoting him in a positive way across the socials with pictures and really trying to promote that image. And I think, looking at the way he's worked on his craft and seeing what we've seen in match sim so far, I think Joe Berry, is ahead of a lot of the pack. We will see Sam Powell-Pepper and Willie Rioli as the forward selections, and I think Joe Berry is probably ahead of Joe Richards. I think they're talking really highly of Joe at the moment, and they're going to pick one Joe. It's going to be Berry by the looks of it. So a lot is yet to be desired. We know we've got a game against St Kilda at their home ground in a couple of weeks' time in February. We then have a showdown in Mount Barker, and then obviously there'll be an internal trial the week before round one at Alberton Oval. So 3 match simulations to work through. A lot to be desired yet before we even consider things with the selection in round one. But right now, if you're sitting here and you're looking at what the possibilities are, he's training that well that he can't be not selected when it comes to round one. So a lot of positive feedback for Joe. And I think, when you have this kind of excitement around a player, we talk about how exciting it was to have Rosie, Butters and Dersma when they were joined into the club. We talk about the excitement, with Miles Bergman and these developing players. Jason Horne-Francis had that excitement around him. And at pick 15, you wouldn't think there's that much of excitement. I know it's a first round pick, but to come through the way that he has is truly extraordinary. So I'm very much keen to see more of Joe across this preseason, and I know more fans will come along to see what Berry can bring to the club, because at the moment he's very good. For those fantasy players out there, he's 140k small forward. So if he's playing up the ground, as some match simulations have suggested from training, then he's a very good pick. Because definitely with these forwards and lack of, sometimes they're going to have lackluster games, and especially as a kid, he's not going to be firing early, but as a player that can play up the ground, that high half forward role, can play deep as a small forward, and if he's kicking 2 goals, having 15 possessions to start his career, then hell, you're jumping on that. And I think as a Port fan, you're very excited for that too. And we talk about players that could potentially play round 1, and we're talking who's a lock in certain spots. Small forward game at the moment at Port Adelaide strong. We've got, as I said, Sam Powell-Pepper, Willie Rioli, Joe Richards, Jed McEntee also, in that list. The youngsters of Lockie Charlton and Tommy A. I'm not going to pronounce his last name because I can't. So yeah, it's quite interesting to sort of sit here and try and pin the magnets around and see what they can do and what players can play multiple positions and is it going to have an impact. And I think one thing for Port Adelaide's sake is we need a small forward and a stay-at-home small forward. Willie Rioli does that. That will allow him more to do so, especially if players like Joe Berry are coming into the side and really possessing a craft that we've been looking for. And with an open-sided forward line and a changing dynamic with Jack Lukosius and Mitch Georgiadis, Ollie Lord and players around him. And I think that's a real positive, and I can see that being a real positive for Joe's game. And playing freely, I hope there's no expectations on the kid. I know Ken's a very, very, very welcoming human being, and he's very good with the youngsters. And I think, again, you'll sit here and be like, well, Joe, it's all yours. Play your game. Play your style, show your personality. He's a bubbly character, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in Port colours, whether it's round 1, whether it's coming round 2, 3, 4, wherever he makes his debut. Right now, I'll sit here and happily say he will play round 1 against Collingwood. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, Port fans, about Joe Berry and your prospects for him playing round 1. I say he's a lock, but there is still many things to work our way through. Like I said, a couple of pre-season matches and internal to work through. Hopefully no injuries for anyone. And we just work through pre-season. It's hotting up at the moment. You're sitting here and you're like, well, there's pre-season matches, there's fantasy picks to be selected, drafts and classics teams to be made. There's a lot going into this pre-season, and well, we're all here for it. We're all heating up. So I'm looking forward to sitting here and covering the whole pre-season and the rest of the 2025 season with you. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're new for plenty more Port Adelaide and AFL content to come your way. Thank you so much for watching. My name's Anthony, and as always, come the pair.